It's 7 p.m. Wednesday, May 29th here in Seoul.
These are the top stories at this hour. With civilian and military drills underway in South Korea, President Moon Jae-in calls for airtight national security while seeking peace on the Korean peninsula.
A former CIA official downplays North Korea's recent missile launch, saying it was just a test and nothing more.
South Korea's fertility rate continues to fall, as well as the number of births, as measures apparently failed to turn around this demographic slide.
And we take an in-depth look into how members of Generation Z are blurring the lines of digital and face-to-face communication. NEWSCENTER begins now. Good evening and welcome to Arirang News Center, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Noaram.
And I'm Han-daeun. Thank you as always for joining us. President Moon Jae-in says South Korea needs to beef up its self-defense capabilities while still pursuing peace in the region.
During a National Security Council meeting earlier today, the president also stressed the significance of the inaugural Ulji Taegeuk drills, which started earlier this week. Shin Se-min starting us off tonight.
President Moon Jae-in is calling on South Korea to beef up its self-defense capabilities while still pursuing peace in the region. During a National Security Council meeting to discuss the 4-day inaugural civilian military exercises, the Ulji Taegeuk drills, President Moon said there should be no crack in national security despite the ongoing peace drive.
앞으로도 우리에게 선택권이 있는 한 평화를 향한 여정을 멈추지 않을 것입니다. 어떠한 어려움도 극복하고 새로운 한반도 시대를 반드시 열어나갈 것입니다.
The South Korean leader also expressed gratitude to his North Korean and U.S. counterparts for helping to ease military tensions in the region. The president touched on the transfer of wartime operational control, or OPCON, from Washington to Seoul, saying that the ongoing Ulji Taegeuk drills should help prep the nation for when Seoul takes over the primary leadership role.
을지 연습과 태극 연습을 처음으로 통합하여 실시하는 이번 연습을 향후 전시작전권 전환에 대비하고 자주국방 역량을 국군이 강화하는 계기로 삼아야 할 것입니다.
A South Korean general is set to lead joint military drills with the U.S. in August to test Seoul's readiness for wartime OPCON transfer. This, according to ROK U.S. Combined Forces Command and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The talks of OPCON transfer started over a decade ago, but the transition effort has been hampered amid Pyongyang's increased military threats. However, as the mood on the Korean peninsula improved, the two allies have steadily and systematically been moving forward with the transfer. Apart from the military-related readiness, the president added the civilian government exercises reflect a broader spectrum on the national security, including a non-military-related threats like the natural disasters, disease, and terrorism. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Also today, President Moon Jae-in has slammed the main opposition party for defending the lawmaker who leaked of a recent phone conversation he had with U.S. President Donald Trump. In a weekly cabinet meeting, President Moon made a comment on the matter for the first time, saying there is no room for excuses and urged the Liberty Korea party to show they care about basic common sense. A diplomat working at the South Korean embassy in Washington disclosed details of the phone conversation between the two presidents to a Liberty Korea party lawmaker who used the information to criticize the Moon administration's diplomacy. The diplomat is facing disciplinary measures at the foreign ministry as well as a criminal probe. And staying with the president, the South Korean leader will embark on a 3-nation, 8-day tour of Finland, Norway, and Sweden in June. The presidential office says the state visits will be a chance for Moon to solidify support from the northern part of Europe in keeping with the denuclearization drive on the Korean peninsula.
This trip is expected to serve as an opportunity to reaffirm common ground with the three northern European nations, which have made great contributions to international peace and stability, about how to establish peace through the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Moon will also share his inclusive growth initiative to accelerate and cooperate on the fast-developing technologies in the face of the fourth industrial revolution, as well as an eco-friendly economy, including the use of hydrogen. Former CIA Assistant Director Andrew Kim says North Korea's latest missile launch was only for the sake of testing and nothing more. He also says Pyongyang could fire one or two more in the future if its test earlier this month was a failure. Or Oh Jung-hee with more.
The former CIA Assistant Director has downplayed concerns over North Korea's firing of short-range missiles earlier this month. Andrew Kim said the regime did not necessarily shoot them to shake up nuclear talks, but rather, quote, just to test them, and added the regime could launch more in the future.
When talks are suspended, the North feels the need to test things they've not been able to because they can't when talks resume. If the missile launch was a failure, they'd do it once or twice more. And when they're done with that, they'd come back to the table.
His comments came at an international forum this week hosted by Seoul's state-run Institute for National Security Strategy, which is under the nation's intelligence agency. Former intelligence officials from 16 countries gathered at the event. They assessed that North Korea's missile launch this month was a calculated move that doesn't violate UN Security Council resolutions and leaves the door open for dialogue. On recent discussions of humanitarian aid to the North, Andrew Kim said providing aid would be a good way to show the U.S. is willing to improve relations with Pyongyang. The former CIA official called on the regime to come out for frequent dialogue. He stressed communication is the most important thing when it comes to becoming friends, but communicating with North Korea is not easy.
North Korea communicates only when it wants to and avoids it when it doesn't want to. I've told North Korean officials that we should talk more often. It's necessary to communicate and grow our understanding of each other. The topics don't have to be heavy.
The U.S. isn't even aware of who is now U.S. State Secretary Mike Pompeo's North Korean counterpart and will only find out once Pyongyang comes back to dialogue, he says. In mid-April, the North changed the head of its United Front Department, which used to be the position held by Kim Yong-chol, the regime's top nuclear negotiator. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
A new UN report shows the shocking levels of corruption in the North Korean regime, revealing that officials extort money from citizens who are struggling to get by. Lee Seung-jae has the details.
In an eye-opening report released on Tuesday that further peels back the appalling layers of corruption in the regime, UN Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet revealed that North Koreans are forced to pay bribes to officials in order to survive.
The report we have released is based on 214 first-hand accounts from people who managed to escape from the DPRK. They describe how their most fundamental rights to food, to water, to health, shelter, work, freedom of movement are violated, and how access to this universal right depends primarily on their ability to bribe state officials.
Bachelet says officials extort money from everyday citizens who struggle to make ends meet, even threatening them with detention and prosecution, especially those working in the informal economy. According to the report, bribes are usually in the form of cash or cigarettes, so that citizens don't have to report to state-assigned jobs where they receive no salary, hence allowing them to earn income in rudimentary markets. The report adds that others bribe border guards to cross into China, where women and girls are vulnerable to trafficking into forced marriages or the sex trade. North Korea denies the findings in the report, saying it's a political-motivated hit job against the regime. It instead pins blame on UN sanctions that create a dire humanitarian situation for North Korean citizens. However, Bachelet says the regime should clamp down on corrupt officials and allow its people the freedom of movement within the country and abroad. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
North Korea's mortality rate due to air pollution has dropped compared to a couple of years ago, but it is still very high. The World Trade Organization says 207 out of 100,000 North Koreans die due to pollution every year. That's a rate 10 times higher than South Korea. For China, it was 113 and 156 for Mongolia. The WHO says poor air quality can cause stroke, heart disease, lung cancer, as well as a number of other serious illnesses. North Korea's tuberculosis rate is the 6th highest in the world. Now, South Korea's fertility rate has continued to fall. According to Statistics Korea today, there were 27,000 births recorded in March, down near 10% on year, making it the lowest figure for March on record. To get more details, we have our business correspondent Kim Hae-sung in the studio for us tonight. Hae-sung, it's a pleasure to have you here in the studio. Now, let's get straight to it. How serious is this low birth rate issue at the moment?
Right, Adam. The number of births in Korea has been falling on year every month since December 2015. So total fertility rate is the number of children a woman can have during her lifetime. So low birth rate is a phenomenon seen in many advanced countries around the world, but Korea has seen that happen very rapidly. For the first quarter of this year, the total fertility rate was at 1.01, down from 1.07 in the first quarter of the previous year. For 2018, Korea's total fertility rate recorded 0.98, falling below 1. The rate has been falling since the 1970s when it was at 4.5. It dropped below 3 in the mid-1970s, then below 2 in the mid-1980s. Korea has the lowest fertility rate out of 35 countries in the OECD. In fact, it is the only country with a rate below 1. Demographers have said a country's fertility rate needs to be at least 2.1 for its population to be stable, so for Korea's population to remain at around 50 million. According to National Assembly data, at a rate of 1.2, South Korea could face natural extinction by 2750. With the rate currently at just 1, this so-called natural extinction could happen earlier than 2750.
Now, natural extinction, that is a very scary word to hear, and I see how rapidly the Korean population is falling at the moment. Now, what are the exact socio-economic implications of this issue?
Well, more than anything else, it could drive down Korea's economic growth, potential economic growth, because economy is measured by labor, capital, and technology. But then in this case, falling birth rate means a shrinking working population, those aged between 15 and 64, which is currently at around 37 million people. But on top of the falling fertility rate, Korea has an increasing aging population. Korea already became an age society in 2017, with those over the age of 65 accounting for more than 14% of the total population. Economic growth depends on capital, labor, and technology, as I mentioned. With the working population falling, it basically means lower consumption. Production from companies will drop, investment falls, unemployment goes up, and saving falls, leading to lower public tax revenue. This whole cycle drives down the potential economic growth rate, weighing on the Korean economy, which already faces slower growth. The burden on young people to support the elderly also goes up. The number of elderly that needs to be supported per 100 people of working age in Korea would increase past 100 in 2067, a faster rate than any other OECD country.
On top of creating a pension shortfall problem, the government's higher social welfare spending for the elderly could also lead to a fiscal deficit like some Southern European countries. That would in turn worsen the foreign trade balance, affect the value of Korean won, and even the financial and fiscal system.
Now, I see. And this low birth rate is not a new issue. I mean, we've been covering it in our newscasts often as well. What have been some of the government measures to handle this, or are there any recommendations of what the government can do?
In fact, the government has already spent $130 billion over the past 13 years to tackle this low fertility rate problem. But then that would be around $56,000 per child. That's pretty big, Adam. And the government has used it to provide more daycare centers, support child rearing costs, and provide new housing assistance for newlyweds. There are debates about whether it was useful or not, but to find the right, most effective measure, you need to find the real cause of the low birth rates. Have a listen to an expert I talked to.
Though minimal, data show government measures did help increase childbirth among married couples. The problem is the number of marriages itself is falling. Young people are postponing marriage or opting to stay single, mainly due to financial instability. To help slow the speed of falling birth rates, there should be measures to improve the quality of life, labor reform, and helping young people find jobs earlier.
So rather than focusing on incentives for married couples, I think boosting productivity could be key, which given that it won't be easy to raise the fertility rate substantially in the near term. So for instance, European countries, they have this immigration policy to increase the number of working age population. In Japan, they're pushing for more female working population participation in their workforce. And another way would be technological innovation like increased automation.
AI and automation can recoup productivity losses from the fall in the working population and reduce the need for simple labor tasks. Also, investing abroad is important too. For instance, Japan, which has a low growth rate, earns $200 billion a year in profits from foreign investments and real estate investment to keep its foreign trade balance stable, finding growth engines abroad.
Right, I see. And some more well-rounded long-term measures are needed, as we can see, and hopefully we can find a solution to this chronic social issue as soon as we can. Hae-sung, thank you for coming in today. Excellent reporting, as always.
My pleasure.
In other news, the US is keeping a close eye on South Korea's currency practices, putting the country on a watch list of possible currency manipulators. But Washington says it has seen improvements and is willing to remove South Korea from the list if these improvements are maintained. Our Ko Ryun-hee reports.
The Trump administration has decided to keep South Korea on its monitoring list for currency manipulation. According to the Treasury Department's report released on Tuesday, 9 countries, including China, are on the monitoring list. The previous report had 6 nations on the watch list. The report aims to identify potentially unfair currency practices which could harm American workers and businesses. Countries that meet 2 of the 3 criteria are placed on the watch list. The revised criteria include a trade surplus of at least $20 billion with the U.S., a current account surplus that is at least 2% of GDP, and persistent intervention in foreign exchange markets. Although Korea met only one of the criteria this time, news reports say the country was still on the list because Seoul met 2 of the 3 criteria last October. Generally, the U.S. needs to see improvements for at least a year before it removes countries from the watch list. The Treasury Department welcomed Korea's public report in March on its foreign exchange intervention. The report emphasized it would remove South Korea from the watch list if conditions remain the same at the time of its next report. Washington has not designated a major trade country a currency manipulator since 1994. If a country is labeled as a currency manipulator, this could lead to trade sanctions imposed by the U.S. The Trump administration's decision not to label China a currency manipulator this time has prevented trade tensions from escalating. However, the report says it will carefully monitor developments surrounding the exchange rate issue, saying that the renminbi depreciated by 3.8% against the dollar during the second half of 2018. Ko Ryun-hee, Arirang News.
Huawei has taken steps to expedite its legal case against the U.S. government. China's CCTV reports that the Chinese tech giant has requested a summary judgment in a U.S. court, which it wants to overturn part of the law that bans government agencies from using Huawei technology. It says that clause of the National Defense Authorization Act is unconstitutional because it targets a private company for punishment without trial. In response to the request for a summary judgment, the federal court for the Eastern District of Texas has scheduled a hearing for September 19th. The annual Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity has kicked off for a 3-day run on Jeju Island, where former and sitting diplomats as well as experts will discuss regional issues. They will work out how to peacefully resolve stalled nuclear talks between Pyongyang and Washington, as well as look at what the prospects are for the North's denuclearization. Seoul's nuclear envoy Lee Do-hun, former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and former Special Envoy for the Six-Party Talks Joseph Detrani will be among the speakers. Other agenda items include the future of US-China relations and President Moon Jae-in's new southern policy. Meanwhile, Jeju has been hosting more than 40 diplomats from around the world who have been learning about the island's culture and its public policy. Since Monday, they've been visiting historical sites and studying the development of Jeju-do's tourism industry. They have also been learning about the island's goal of becoming carbon-free by the year 2030. They are in Korea as part of an annual 3-month program run by the Korea Foundation, which brings diplomats from around the world to learn about the Korean culture and language.
There's been a growing public interest in a notoriously bloody battle site during the Korean War following the Inter-Korean Summit last September. With thousands of war remains presumed to be buried at the site, South Korea is leading a project to excavate the remains. Our Kim Ji-yeon takes us to the site located inside the demilitarized zone.
66 years since the two Koreas signed the armistice agreement that ended the 1950 to 1953 Korean War, a battle site that has remained untouched is being unearthed in the hope the remains of fallen soldiers can finally be returned to their homeland and their families. This is Arrowhead Ridge site, one of the fiercest battlegrounds during the Korean War, located inside the demilitarized zone. Bone fragments and personal items have been found during the excavation, which was initiated in early April. Some 300 soldiers who fought on the South Korean side and around 3,000 soldiers who fought for the North Korean side are presumed to be buried at the site. As of last Monday, around 325 bone fragments have been excavated, including more than 23,000 personal items, such as body armor and gas masks. Also, nearly 150 mines and 2,400 unexploded pieces of ammunition have been found and are being used to uncover more about the battle.
All of the soldiers at the DMZ site are working on the demining and excavation project with a great sense of duty. And for me, it's a personal honor to be here. I hope North Korea carries out their part of the Inter-Korean military agreement and jointly conducts the project as part of the peace drive.
The South Korean military says it's carrying out a detailed examination and DNA analysis to identify who the bone fragments belong to. In March, Sergeant Park Jae-won was laid to rest at the Daejeon National Cemetery after being found and identified at the Arrowhead Ridge site during a demining project conducted last year. The excavation was originally a project that was to be jointly carried out by the two Koreas, as agreed upon in their Inter-Korean Comprehensive Military Agreement signed last September. But the South Korean military is currently carrying it out alone, as the North has remained unresponsive to calls to jointly conduct the project as agreed, as its denuclearization talks with the U.S. are at an impasse following the breakdown of the Hanoi summit in February. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News, inside the demilitarized zone.
In Korea, the first members of Generation Z are entering adulthood as the first generation to have had digital technology at their fingertips their whole lives. For them, the boundary is even less clear between the digital and physical worlds. And as adults, that means they could be changing the culture. Here's our Oh Soo-young with the first of a 3-part series on Generation Z.
When a picture's worth 1,000 words, an emoji or a GIF is more than enough to get the message across. At least that's the case for Generation Z, young people in their teens and early 20s born after the mid-1990s.
Sometimes you could have a whole conversation just using emojis or GIFs. I don't really make phone calls anymore. I feel more comfortable messaging or video calling my friends.
Born in the age of internet and raised with social media, members of Generation Z are seen as digital natives who are more used to texting and sharing images than using elaborate sentences. This is especially true in Korea, where over 20 million people, nearly half the population, have purchased emojis for messaging.
A few years ago, teens made up 16% of purchases on KakaoTalk, but that has now doubled. We're working on more specific expressions and diverse, amusing scenarios that young people can identify with.
Sociologists say emojis are becoming emotional agents for Generation Z, conveying their feelings in the best way they know how. Communicating through video has also become second nature. Generation Z capture short and snappy clips on the spot to share with their friends, and a growing number prefer to spend time together screen to screen rather than face to face using video apps.
We enable natural video chatting for all situations. When you can't use audio, for instance, you can look at your friend while typing out caption-like text and also send video texts. Around 20,000 people use that app daily, usually for more than an hour in the evening.
Researchers say it's a generation shift that's happening globally.
They've had cameras with them their whole lives, basically, and they're also instantly connected. So they never wait to tell someone, something that's happened, that they tell them instantly. They often prefer visual over text because they have become experts at just scrolling and scanning text rather than reading things slowly and properly. For them, their virtual online world is just as real, it's just as significant, and it's where they hang out just as much as they do in the physical world.
As Generation Z begins entering the workforce, researchers expect their growing social presence to change communication as we know it, interacting and expressing themselves through their native language of pixels. 오수영, Arirang News.
For the first time, foreign visitors to South Korea are saying they enjoyed sampling the local cuisine more than the shopping, which had long been the biggest draw. Our Kim Dami takes a look at what it is about Korean street food that captivates the hearts of foreigners.
While most foreign visitors come to South Korea for the shopping, more and more are citing the local food as the most enjoyable part of their trip. In fact, in 2018, 30% of foreign tourists said Korean food was the most satisfying part of their trip. Myeongdong, the top destination for foreign visitors, is the go-to spot for street food, especially the classics like Korean rice cake, tteokbokki, and fried dumplings.
Great food. It's so simple. It's very clean and very tasty. A bit spicy, but really great.
Yeah, so everyone comes here for shopping and for food. My friend was coming for shopping, I was coming for food.
Korean hot dogs are another beloved street snack for locals and foreigners alike. They're similar to American corn dogs, except some are coated in sugar and are oftentimes full of cheese. From traditional food like pancakes called jeon to more modern fare like fried chicken, 닭강정, Korean street food has something to appeal to everyone's tastes. Most of these street food dishes are affordable even for those on tight budgets, with prices starting out at around 3,000 won or around $3.
We have nothing like this where we come from. We come from Sweden. Yeah, it was 5,000 per dish, which seems like reasonable. It seems fair, and I think it's affordable, and it's definitely worth it. If you're in Korea, you gotta come here.
There are also options that can cost up to $15, such as dishes like grilled lobster with cheese. However, cash is a must, as street food stalls rarely have card processing machines on hand. And later at night, street food turns into the perfect side dish to have with some drinks at these Korean street bars called 포장마차. Enjoying the cozy and relaxing atmosphere at 종로 3가 may be the perfect way to end the day or experience some night culture here in South Korea. Kim Dami, Arirang News.
The South Korean capital is offering its facilities like the subway for use as test beds for innovative technology, with hopes of making it one of the world's top cities for startups. Our Kan Young-woo has the story.
The Seoul metropolitan government says it's going to invest $126 million through 2023 to support over 1,000 companies to boost innovative technology development. With the project Testbed Seoul, the city announced on Monday that it will provide its subways, roads, and bridges to evaluate innovative companies' technology. Seoul will kick off its project this year by investing some $8 million to test a number of technologies developed by 50 companies. Starting June 1st, firms will be able to submit their applications online, and the result will be posted within the next 8 weeks. Companies can apply for 2 types of test beds. They will either receive financial support from the Seoul metropolitan government or be provided with test spots, including City Hall, the City Hospital, and underground markets, where companies will be allowed to test their prototypes and services for up to a year. Seoul will issue performance certificates to products with proven safety and function. The city is going to raise its budget limit to $16,000 to purchase innovative technology, and it will introduce new policies next year to encourage its sub-agencies and departments to buy innovative products. Planning to establish the Seoul Business Agency Testbed Consortium in July to support companies, Seoul is expected to hold a testbed exhibition to promote innovative products in September, while organizing a startup pitching day every month. Kanyong-woo, Arirang News.
South Korea's parliamentary speaker Moon Hee-sang has called for Russia to continue its efforts toward achieving peace on the Korean peninsula. Moon met with Vyacheslav Volodin, the chair of Russia's lower house State Duma, on Tuesday in Moscow, saying that peace on the Korean peninsula will benefit Russia and the rest of the international community. The speaker added it will also accelerate practical cooperation between Moscow and Seoul. North Korea says it remains committed to forming unified teams with South Korea at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. During a recent interview with Chinese media, Pyongyang's Vice Sports Minister Won Gi-roo said the joint teams are what the people of both Koreas want and are also in accordance with the spirit of the Olympics. The International Olympic Committee had approved 4 unified teams in rowing, judo, women's basketball and women's field hockey for the upcoming Summer Games. South Korea's under-20 football team have beaten South Africa to claim their first win at the Under-20 World Cup in Poland. The win came after the squad lost to Portugal in their first group match. Defender Kim Hyun-woo scored a header in the second half to help his team win 1-0. South Korea will next play Argentina on Friday evening local time. Hang Si-hyuk, CEO and executive producer of Big Hit Entertainment, has made the US Billboard chart's International Power Players list for the 2nd year in a row. He was selected under the recording sector of Billboard's list of 104 leaders of the world music industry. Bang is said to be the mastermind behind the success of K-pop boy band BTS. That has been your 3-minute Newsflash.
A high-pressure front has been driving up temperatures on the peninsula.
Yes, and the sunshine is predicted to persist into the weekend. Let's get more details from our Michelle Park at the Weather Center. Michelle, what's the latest?
Hi guys, the hot weather's back and tomorrow won't be any different as the heat will have a firm grip on the nation. Now we'll see clouds from the south moving east as we enter Thursday afternoon. But we'll still have to continue taking the necessary precautions to avoid heat-related illnesses. And have a light cardigan or a jacket maybe to stay warm during the cooler morning though, as Seoul kicks off to 15 degrees Celsius tomorrow, and Busan and Jeju can expect 17 and 18 degrees Celsius respectively. And after lunchtime, the mercury will soar to 26 for Seoul and 30 for Gyeongju. Hot sunny days are forecast until next week, so no chance of any relief from the heat. And by next Tuesday, Seoul will top to 30 degrees with huge gaps between the lows and the highs. So please take care. I'll leave you with weather conditions around the world.
Well, that will wrap it up for this edition of Arirang News. Thank you, as always, for watching.
Stay tuned to Arirang for more analysis on current issues and news in depth coming up next.
Planning a self-guided tour in